This is the most valuable thread that I've read on social media in quite some time, and I shared it yesterday. By the way, it's 8:21. Good morning. Great to be here on KCMO. Going to be another beautiful day in Kansas City, and we are just over 10 minutes away from a tirade Tuesday. Okay, this is from a Financial Times reporter, John Byrne Murdoch. So it's not like some right-wing guy on social media. Columnist and chief data reporter at the Financial Times. And it's a thread about the racial realignment that's happening right now in American politics. And I'm going to read it to you here and then opine on it. But I think it's important to go through it step by step. He writes here, I think this is simultaneously one of the most important social trends in the U.S. today and one of the most poorly understood. And it's about the non-white voters shifting away from the Democratic Party and towards the Republican Party. He goes on the note here, last week a New York Times poll showed Joe Biden leading Donald Trump by less than 10 points among non-white Americans, a group that Biden won by almost 50 points back in 2020, 5-0. He said, averaging all the recent polls, Democrats are losing more ground with non-white voters than any other demographic. Byrne Murdoch writes, people often respond to these figures with accusations of polling errors. But this is not just one rogue result. High-quality, long-running surveys, like from Gallup, have been showing a steepening decline in Black and Latino voters identifying as Democrats for several years. He adds, America's gold standard national election surveys show a similarly sharp decline, with non-white proximity to Democrats now at its lowest since the 1960s, before the Civil Rights Movement and the 1964 election, which aligned black voters with the Democratic Party and against the GOP. So the non-white shift away from the Dems is very real, but what's driving it? He says the bond between young black Americans and Democrats is far weaker than among older cohorts. He adds the oldest black Americans, whose political allegiances were formed in the 60s and the 70s, identify as Democrats over Republicans by a margin of 82%. But among younger black voters, who have grown up in a very different socio-political environment, the Democratic advantage is only 33%. Byrne Murdoch adds the changing image of the parties regarding class and income is also a factor. In 2020, the richest third of voters favored the Dems for the first time, and the Republicans improved with the poorest. The GOP now appeals more to a working and middle-class voter of all ethnicities. He adds here, but fading memories and increased competition for working-class votes are fixable problems. As long as these voters' values remain fundamentally aligned with those of the Democratic Party, the right person, policy, or rhetoric can win them back. However, a much more ominous sign for the Democrats that is less widely understood. Large numbers of non-white Americans have long held much more conservative views than their voting patterns would suggest. And their values are very much not aligned with the Democratic Party. See, the Democratic Party has, if it ends up losing to Donald Trump, and if they do end up blowing it with working class and minority voters, they will have no one to blame but their own woke, overeducated, largely white social media bubble that they have created for themselves. They believe that Twitter, X, is real life, and it's not. They have surrounded themselves with a bunch of white-guilted graduate students who are non-binary from Brown, instead of working-class Latinos, blacks, and whites. And they have convinced people, or they've convinced themselves, that the insanity of the most progressive folks on social media is where the average Democratic working-class person is at. And it's not true. But by embracing things like there's multiple genders, they have completely disenfranchised themselves from like just normal people who are maybe moderate Democrats, old school Democrats, union Democrats. But they're like spending their time trying to convince you that gender's not real. They've embraced every far left social issue they can get their hands on. Joe Biden's up there apologizing on MSNBC over the weekend for calling an alleged murderer an illegal immigrant. Like, that's the kind of stuff that it's not that like Republicans are doing anything smart. They're just not doing that. Like, I'm not even going to give Republicans a lot of credit for any of this. They just haven't gone completely insane on some of these things that are turning off normal middle-class working people. And then, yes, a lot of people who are living through the last 3-4 years and are experiencing inflation. We've got these inflation numbers that came out this morning that are showing another 3.8% increase year over year. That's now 35 straight months of inflation over 3%. Working class people, even if they don't care about the social issues and the insanity of the moment, they're looking at that and they're saying, well, this ain't working for me. As a working class stiff, this is not helping me out. And then, on top of that, as the author noted there at the very end, a large portion of these people, non-white Americans, have often had much more conservative views. They go to church. They don't think abortion at 40 weeks is right. Like all these things that they inherently don't agree on, their own party, the Democratic Party, is turning on them with. And the Republicans are reaping those rewards. And it might work out great for them come November.